It's also a mimer from Shabbos Parsh Vayichlach Yutes Kislev, but this time it's from Tavshin Lamed Gimel. And the Rebbe is also going to analyze the same pasuk that we had last week's Dvar Malchus, but with a little bit of a different perspective and a different emphasis in this mimer. Katointi Mekol Chasadim Mekol Emes Gomer Yaakov Avinu said when he davened to Hashem to save him from Esav, he said, I've become small from all of the kindnesses and all the truth, etc. Because only with my staff did I cross the Yarden, and now give a look at the great chasadim that you did to me. I have all this wealth, etc., etc. Rebbe explains in the letter that Alter Rebbe wrote after returning from imprisonment in Petersburg, that he was encouraging chassidim to have great humility as a result of the great kindnesses that they experienced in the release of the Alter Rebbe from prison. What does it mean that I have become small from all the kindnesses, etc.? Pirush, the Alter Rebbe explains, in every single kindness that Hashem does for each person, the person needs to be extremely humble. Because the idea of kindness that the person experiences, it's closeness of Hashem. Whoever is close to Hashem, in the stronger and the more powerfully they are close to Hashem, he has to be even more humble. The more a person is in the presence of Hashem, the more he's insignificant. So every single time he receives a kindness from Hashem, he is experiencing a closeness to Hashem. Therefore, the closer I am to Hashem, the more humble I am. And that's what Alter Rebbe was directing the chassidim in a very practical sense, not to lead chas v'sholem, the victory and the release of the Alter Rebbe from imprisonment should not, heaven forbid, lead to arrogance, etc., etc., and to chas v'sholem not to lead to any more disputes, etc., but just the opposite. It should lead them to a greater humility than they even had before. So now the Rebbe wants to analyze what Alter Rebbe says in light of what it's saying in the pasuk. The pasuk doesn't just say the words "Mikol HaChasadim," which is the primary focus of the Alter Rebbe over there in the quote that we're bringing down earlier, but the pasuk also mentions Mikol Emes, and the Rebbe wants to see how this Kol Emes from all the truth. What, first of all, the simple meaning of it, and then how does this apply in this whole idea of the humility that a person needs to experience? So the Rebbe says in the end of line 9, we need to understand the order of the matters that's written over here in this pasuk of Katainti. Initially it says from all the kindnesses, and then afterwards it says from all the truth. What does it mean, all the truth? I become small from all the truth. What does truth mean? Truth means the fact that Hashem kept His word, that you followed through on all the promises that you promised me, you kept. So that is also something that makes me humble. So the Rebbe now asks a very simple question. Which is greater, and which is more of Hashem's kindness? When He shows kindness that is unpromised, or a promised kindness? So he says in line 13, Vim Kain, if so. Initially the pasuk should have said, Katointi Mikola Emes, and afterwards all the kindnesses, it's even a greater thing. In other words, when someone keeps their promise to you, keeps their deal, keeps what they have assured you to do, that's not as great and as wonderful, and therefore not as humbling when it comes to the Eibishter, as when he does an utter and complete kindness that one has completely not been promised and not been assured of, etc., etc. So he says, "V'af sheyesh chidush b'shmiras havtoch, beglal achsha Hashem moed mishiv techani chulu v'yigrim chulum," that even though there is a novelty in keeping his promise, what's the uniqueness? Seemingly you would say, Hashem of course keeps his promises. He says, not necessarily. Yaakov Avinu was worried, we know, that since you promised me, there might have become a change that my deficiencies, for lack of a more negative terminology, would have caused that Hashem would have gone back on his promises. So therefore, it's not that keeping the promise is a given. In Yaakov's mind, keeping the promise was not a given. Why? Because I might have ruined what I've been promised. But regardless, the Rebbe says, whether the promise had to take place or they didn't have to take place, it's still not the same as utter kindness that's not assured and not a promise. It says, that it's not the same thing. The idea of kindness is in guarding and fulfilling a matter that he already promised to something that is initially a way of kindness. So the Rebbe is just amplifying on what he said before. First of all, to fulfill what he promised is not such a big deal, at least in comparison, definitely not in comparison to kindness. Even if you want to say that he's not bound by it, that Hashem is not bound by it, because if in Yaakov Avinu's thought, he thought that he might have lost that promise, but still in all, it's not the same as a kindness that you get from the Eibishter. So therefore, in the order of the pasuk, it should have said, first, that I become humble from the truth, in other words, the things that you promised me, and then I become even more humbled from just kindness that was completely unwarranted and unpromised. So from this, the Rebbe is going to derive that obviously the pasuk is actually going higher. From this itself, it's obvious that there is a greater advantage and a level that's higher in the description of from all the truth. Therefore, after he says from all the kindnesses, he adds something that's even higher than that. That affects even more so the bittul of the humility of feeling himself small, mikol ha'emes. And obviously we need to understand what is that greater type of aspect of Hashem that causes by Yaakov Avinu this level of katainti, this humility. That is the level of mikol ha'emes. That's question number one of the mind. Also, we need to understand what he says following this. I crossed the Yarden with my staff, and now give a look at me. I'm such a success. There are many other specific and detailed types of kindnesses that he doesn't enumerate it over here. Whether it was saving him from Lavan's plotting and all the trickery that Lavan was trying to effect, and so on and so forth. Yaakov Avinu, if he's either he could just refer to the kindnesses vaguely, or if he's going to enumerate the kindnesses that Hashem did to him, why specifically does he choose to speak about that I crossed with my staff, and now give a look at me now. Ois Beis, second page of the minor. We could also explain, and we have to explain also the lesson from this in the avoid of every single yid, like in all matters of the Torah that's everlasting. Especially that the idea that's explained in this pasuk is a very general idea, like the simple matters of the psukim. How does this a very general aspect? This entire katainti was by way of introduction. Before he was going to ask by Hashem the help, please save me from Esau. I'm fearing him because maybe he's going to kill, etc., etc. So, before presenting that request, and you said, Hashem said, I will do good to you and I will make your seed numerous. So he presented it as by way of introduction. Who am I and what am I to ask of you anything? I've become humbled from all your kindnesses and truth. So therefore, since the request that this is an introduction to is shezeu inyan klali shabai talui kiyum klal Yisrael. This is a general matter. The request about saving him from Esau was a general matter that upon his being saved from Esau is dependent the entire existence of Klal Yisrael. Just like by Yaakov, this was a general matter because it mattered to his entire life. It wasn't just a minor detail, it meant his own survival. So therefore, so to the lesson is to every single yid, that every single yid is an entire world. So it's a general idea because the survival of the Yidden is an outcome and was what Yaakov Avinu was davening for. So therefore, the survival of the Jewish people is a very general thing. So what is prefacing this is what Yaakov Avinu said, Katainti. Another emphasis how this lesson is applicable to every single Yid. Like it's also understood from the fact that Rabbeinu Hazaken B'Boyim in Peterburg when the Alter Rebbe came from Petersburg after being released from imprisonment. He wrote to every single Yid the idea that I have become humbled by the what occurred then. In other words, that it repeated itself by the Alter Rebbe, similarly to what happened by Yaakov Avinu, and the Alter Rebbe addressed this to every single Yid. Even though one technically can say that the Alter Rebbe is addressing it to Chassidim, but the very fact that we see that it was incorporated into Tanya, and Tanya is a guidebook for every single Jewish person, so therefore this is something that the Alter Rebbe is writing to every single Yid, and therefore it's applicable to all of us. The second paragraph on the page, line 20, third paragraph. The general idea behind this is, it's known, everything that's being drawn down from above are dependent on a person's service. So it's concerning the drawing down and the revelation of the supernal kindness from above. This is accomplished through the avodah of my becoming humble and small. This means through the avodah of my becoming small, because the revelation of kindness is we draw down greater kindnesses. In other words, you have this type of tier piled up and so on. In other words, you have a revelation of kindness from above. Then we are humbled, and that humility causes even greater kindnesses, And then it affects that the next humility will be even higher than before. So it's a constant cycle. We are receiving kindness from the Eibishter, we are being humbled. Because we are humbled, that becomes a Isrustul Sata, that becomes something that we draw down further kindnesses from Hashem, higher than the previous kindnesses. Now that we have higher kindnesses, so now we are even more humble than we are before. And it just keeps on going, such a beautiful cycle on and on. And the Rebbe says, this is very obvious because the very fact that we read it in the Torah every single year, and we know we're not just recording a past event, but we're reliving this now. So every single year it must be something more. Okay, moving like it's understood from the fact that every single year we read in the Torah the idea that I've become small from all the kindnesses, that I've become humbled from all the kindnesses. This means every single year through the avodah of my humility, we are drawing down greater kindnesses. So then the following year when we read this in the Torah, therefore the humility that occurs in the following year as the result of the kindnesses that I experienced this year is a higher type of humility. How does that work? What makes me say that it's a higher form? So the Rebbe says on the top of page Zayin that we find a similar thing concerning Rosh Hashanah. Similar to what is brought down in Tanya, every single Rosh Hashanah, it comes down a totally new light that was never illuminating and never shining in this world. We know that every Rosh Hashanah, there's the life force and vitality for the entire year comes down into the world. And then Rosh Hashanah in the evening, all the chayas of the previous year departs. And now we need to draw down a new vitality through the tefillos of Rosh Hashanah, through blowing the shofar, etc. But that new vitality is totally new. It's not the same repeat of before. It's a higher level. And now that we're in the year 5,784 since Brias Olam, it's 5,784 times higher than the first Hamshacha that was at the beginning of creation. So the Rebbe now expands this. Just like the Alter Rebbe said in Tani, this applies to the calendar Rosh Hashanah, to the Nigla Rosh Hashanah. Similar to this is what the Rebbe Rashab coined, the Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus, the 19th of Kislev, that also has the repeating of the same things that we went before, but on a higher level. What is the avodah of Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus? It has to be an avodah of humility. The fact, it's understood from the fact that Alter Rebbe wrote this letter immediately after arrival from Petersburg. That shows us that what is the mission, what is the avodah that we need to do for the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, we must do the avodah of Bittul. And every single year, it's in a much higher way, just like every Rosh Hashanah, it's in a much higher way. So the kindnesses that are higher, and therefore the humility is higher, and so on and so forth. It increases year after year after year. More kindnesses, more humility, and so on. Any questions? Ois Gimel, line 8, page Zayin. The idea behind this is, what does this mean over here about this whole avodah that we're talking about, what we have to do down here to draw down from above? It's known concerning the inspiration down here below, that we know there's this whole cycle, that our inspiration down here below needs to draw down and needs to be a prerequisite to an inspiration from below, from above. that when you do an inspiration down here below, and you have a resulting inspiration from above, they need to share certain similarities. And that's why this particular Rusul Sata brings down this Rusul Eilam. Movements from this understood to be able to draw down the idea of all the kindnesses, like the expression is in the pasuk that Yaakov says, "Katointi mikol achsadim liyes karav alavaya," to be close to Hashem. Shezeu initial ma'alim didavak bolos. That is something that's beyond measures and boundaries. That through an avodah it's beyond measure and boundary of the person. So being close to Hashem means that Hashem is kaviyachol, like sharing Himself with us without limitations. So our connection to Hashem must also be outside of the box, outside of any limitations. So the Rebbe is going to now elaborate upon this idea of being outside of limitations by contrasting it, what it means serving Hashem within limitations. So he says in line 15, as it's known, there are two types of service of Hashem. A service that's measured and bounded, and avoid that's beyond measure and boundary. Or like the well-known expression, a service that's based on reason and understanding, of rational service, and a service that is beyond rational reasoning. Vishneya, both of these types of service, Namru Parsha Rishonim, the Kriyashma, were said in the first Parsha of Kriyashma. Avoid shall be tam v'das, the avoid that is based on reason and directed by reason. Shizel Mashu Namru V'dibar Tabam. That's where it says you shall speak in them in the first Parsha. And the Chazal say, but the Torah kosim medaber, that it's the when it says that v'dibar tabam, it's talking about speaking in words of Torah. Now we know Torah is understanding. Shezeu inshal tam v'das, idea of rational reasoning. It's your wisdom and understanding before even the eyes of the nations. Even a non-Jew can appreciate the wisdom that's there in Torah. So Torah is something that has to do with reasoning. That's beyond rational reasoning. That's where it says you shall love your God with all your heart, with all your might. Primarily it's with all your might, but even in general the idea of love, the way he's talking about it now, is higher than Seichel, higher than Torah, top of page Ches. And these two avodas, both the rational approach, the limited approach, and the approach that is higher than rational reasoning, are applicable to every single yid. The person might say, you know what, my level, I know who I am, I'm only shaykh to rational approaches. Some great tzaddikim or some special people or more committed people, they can do the super rational. So the Rebbe says no, both of them are applicable to each one of us. Since he was created by Hashem, who is omnipotent, who can do anything, because that surely he created him in such a manner that they should have both types of avodah that is mentioned earlier, above and within rational reason. So now the Rebbe is going to bring this idea that we find that we were created in this, in the capability to do both, is actually inherent in the psukim that said about the creation of man. Be it Indian explanation of this matter is in Iksiv, it says in the pasuk, Nasa Adam Salmeinu Kedim saying, let us make man in our form and in our likeness. The koi ala avodah shapitam v'das, right away at the beginning of creation. Bitsalmeinu, as he will explain later on, is the avodah that we have been given, that we could do things by a rational reasoning type of avodah. In our likeness, That is the avodah. It's beyond rational reasoning. Both these types of avodas, doing things based on intellect and rational reasoning, and beyond rational reasoning, are similar to above. Just like the simple meaning of the pasuk, where it says in our form, that Abish is saying in our form, meaning the form of above, the form of Alakus. And the same thing, Kidmuseinu, in our likeness, means Hainu Admut Shalanu. It's referring to the likeness of ourselves of Alakus. Meaning that in Alakus there is both of these aspects, and since Adam was created, Yidden were created both in the form and in the likeness, we have both types of avodas. And now he's going to break it down to the two types of levels of avodah. Before he spoke about Torah versus the avodah b'chol vavcha b'chol nafsha b'chol meidecha. Now he's going to divide it between b'chol vavcha b'chol nafsha versus b'chol meidecha. So he says in line 11, V'im shnei ha'inyanim b'chol vavcha gomer b'chol meidecha. These are the two aspects of loving Hashem with all your heart, etc., and loving Him with all your ma'od, with all your might. The geshem sheba'avad b'chol meidecha. Kol atshuka va'ava shalohi la'Hashem lekecha shenamer lifnei zeh. That when it says that you love Him with all your might, so his entire desire, yearning, and love is to Hashem lekecha. It says beforehand, it says v'ahavtas Hashem lekecha b'chol avavcha b'chol nafsha b'chol meidecha. So we're loving Hashem lekecha with all your might. So too, it's also in the love with all your heart and with all your soul. It's avoida that's measured and has a boundary. It's an avoida that's based on rational reasoning. His entire purpose is his goal. What's his aim? His aim is to love Hashem, your God. He should be in a way of cleaving and having enjoyment in Elikecha. That which a love experience is based and predicated on the fact that this is something that causes you pleasure and delight. You fear and you run away from something that is hurtful and painful, and you love and are attracted to something that you enjoy and derive pleasure from. And what is that? That's in the level of Havaya Lekecha. Doesn't say Vahaftas Havaya. It says Vahaftas Havaya Lekecha. What's the emphasis on Lekecha? As we know, Lekecha means your Elikim, your strength, your power and your vitality. So if both of them are focused on Havaya Lekecha, b'chol vavcha, b'chol nafsha, as well as b'chol meidecha, so how does the distinction work? There's still a difference between them. Which is a limited, rational type of avodah that you do with all your heart and with all your soul. Is the level of in my form that we said before has to do with rational reasoning. I was still going to explain that later in the Maimer, what the connection is. And the avodah of with all your might, which is super rational, that's the avodah of in our likeness.